A slice of the community is made possible by the support of the First Horizon Foundation.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Slice of the Community. I'm your host, Jerome Moore, and today we are joined by a live studio audience. Before we get into our guests, first, we're going to be talking specifically about the American Coup, Wilmington, 1989. And so we're going to roll a short teaser to give you all at home what we're going to be talking about a little bit closer.
An American Experience.
We have taken a city as thoroughly, as completely as if captured in battle.
It was the only armed overthrow of an elected government.
This was a coup based on the devaluation of African American citizenship. What Wilmington tells us is how fragile American democracy is.
American Coup, Wilmington, 1898, on American Experience.
All right, so we're back, and we're here with some esteemed panelists, some guests. I would say dear friends as well. Dr. Franklin, Dr. Hannibal, how y'all doing?
Well,
good to meet you. And then I got to make sure I call out the universities too. You know, Fish University, and then my alumni university, the great Middle Tennessee State University. I want to thank both of you all for joining me this evening to talk about Wilmington and to talk about the only successful American coup that was to ever happen on United States soil. After watching the documentary yourselves, for me it was the reconciliation of just thinking about how do the descendants, how are they coping today with those experiences. What were some of the things that initially just came out to you all after watching this documentary? And I'll start with you first, Dr. Franklin.
Well, I have an interest in this topic, and for different reasons of my research. And I guess the way I would probably situate the Wilmington 1898 coup is as part of a wave of massacres and racialized political violence that goes back to the 1860s on up to the 1920s, all of which deserve attention. And the Wilmington experience stands out in part because they had black representation. Wilmington was considered to be a mecca for African Americans. And the level of violence was extraordinarily heightened. And to achieve that coup, for me, from the standpoint of what white supremacists did, what racial terrorists did, two things was they destroyed a potential biracial coalition, electoral coalition, in Wilmington with an intent to divide populists that were joining forces with African American voters. And number one, and number two is that the coup takes place at the same time that you have the Gilded Age and industrialization and this idea that maybe, with the populist idea that maybe blacks can form coalitions with whites around working class issues. I know there's a lot there that we can unpack and dispute, but the fact that the coup takes place in the late 19th century is part of a wave of coups, a wave of racialized violence, political violence, and massacres, to me, is quite telling. And the Wilmington story is really the story that really encapsulates those competing political traditions.
And maybe Dr. Hannibal, you can speak to this just from understanding the time period too. We're talking about some of the first kind of really free black folks, you know, that was able to, you know, break away from slavery and then be able to establish businesses and be able to, you know, build their own schools and you know, they had the daily newspaper, the Daily Record. What were some of the things that stood out from you? And then how does academia, because some of these things are hidden stories, play into making sure we keep amplifying and making sure these stories are told?
Absolutely. And like I said, thank you for having me and thank you for this wonderful, wonderful film. It's been really, I think, illustrative of some of the things that are kind of going on contemporarily. But to your question, I think that, well, for one, the film does a good job of showing the important role that African Americans have played in American democracy itself. Wilmington was perhaps the economic engine of North Carolina for African Americans. You know, white supremacy has been one of those tools that has been used to sort of take African Americans off the playing field of politics. And that worked you know, very well in this case, unfortunately. But when you take you know, what happened in Wilmington, given that African Americans were so prominent there, they had one of the largest concentration of black entrepreneurs in the entire country. And then after a day, all those people are gone. All that economic clout is gone. That really hurts, African American economics, not only in the state, but in the entire region. That doesn't just hurt for a decade or so. There's no economic bailout for African Americans in the in the 1890s, late 19th century, and so it's really telling. And to the second part of your question, I think that ensuring that one of the things that the universities and schools can do is to make sure that they include these sorts of things in their curriculum, to make sure that students of all colors and persuasions have a healthy understanding of American democracy. Right. That way, we don't take present things for granted. Right. Democracy is something that has to be that must be continuously improved upon. Right. And maintained. The integrity must continue to be maintained through successive generations. If we take our eyes off the ball, we feel as if nothing can happen. We miss opportunities to learn from our past.
And this next question is for both of you all, because one of the key things I brought up in the documentary was repair and restorative justice, which are, words. Restorative justice has been brought up lately a lot, I think, in the social justice space in general. And when we think about what harm is being done, especially economic harm, it's like, what does that repair look like? Is it just as one of the descendants says, a kumbaya, we just talk about it, and who does that really benefit? Who does that relieve? But what does that real repair look like? And so I'm curious on to perspective on what is repair in these type of situations where massacres have occurred and economic and generational wealth have been taken away. I'll start with you, Dr. Frank.
Well, I mean, it could tell a number of things. It could be cold cases, opening up cold cases, or announcing them as cold cases so we can even posthumously engage in prosecutions. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission models perhaps is a way to do that. Reparations or some form of reparative justice or reparative monetary payments that we now have enough astute academicians, economists that can quantify how much money and wealth was lost over time or would have been gained over time had those businesses and had African Americans been allowed to stay and operate there. So we can quantify that down to the dollar amount to actually put a number to that when it comes to reparations. But I agree with the descendants in the film. What I'm very cautious about, or at least I struggle with, are ceremonies that are kumbaya moments that really are intended to be kind of economic boosters for the city, and the city's kind of just like Wilmington, it's almost like a natural evolution that Wilmington forgives and moves on, because I think that those kinds of kumbaya moments do actually more damage than they do actually a good. But I mean, I think there's different ways, different models, and then the most important component of some type of restorative or reparative justice is participatory. Okay. It's let the families that are descendants of the Wilmington massacre victims and coup victims, let them decide what are the best approaches and forms of reparative justice that are amenable to them. Okay. So you need a participatory anchor to that as well.
And I'm gonna hold that thought. I'm gonna come to you, Dr. Hannibal, right now. But I want to keep that at the top of mind, because we tried something like that similar here in Nashville with the interstate, and I'd love to see how that maybe parallels.
Absolutely.
Dr. Hannibal.
I think, and those are great ideas, and I totally agree. I think that maybe posthumous, also degrees, kind of just honoring some of these victims. One of the victims was a boy. I mean, and so if the school is still around, maybe just a posthumous diploma, just to acknowledge that you are here. We appreciate your presence here, and this is to acknowledge what you meant to the community. I know that they've done a few statues and things like that, but also, I mean, like the film brings out, is that a lot of descendants, they weren't laid to rest properly, and so I think sometimes ceremonies can be a good thing because it helps to give families a sense of closure. But also the descendants, they are in a great position, I think, to become part of a movement to sort of speak out against racial media. So they know firsthand, or they know directly what a racist media, a reckless racist speech They know directly what type of adverse effects those things can have on an entire city. So I mean, just sort of banding together and continuing to speak out. I think they're in a great position in today's time to be change agents.
Going back to something you said, Dr. Franklin, or just making me kind of localizing it here in Nashville about participatory engagement in reconciliation or reparations, or what's that look like for the descendants of if people are even still alive. We kind of tried, I think, the Jefferson Street cap, to when 40 went through North Nashville, the interstate, and trying to figure out like how do we reconcile, how do we repair that. Didn't seem to work out, and I think a lot of it is because a lot of those people that was harmed are no longer here, or they wouldn't participate and didn't know much about it. Right. Dr. Franklin, how do we mitigate those type of things to make sure community members that have been economically hard through things like that, whether it's a massacre or a massacre via interstate, be repaired? Or is it like, hey, land in a check, and then is that the best way? Or how's that? Because how's that been done well? Is there examples of that being done even well?
I don't know if I would have to give thought to it, especially with interstates, because a lot of communities, hundreds of communities or so, hundreds got cut up by interstates. I don't think that Nashville really tried it with the quote unquote Jefferson Street cap. That was an idea that came out of downtown and was embraced by the Civic Design Center and many kind of white professionals, many of whom have never stepped foot inside of the black community, and then reframed as a reparations or reparative justice, just for the sole purposes of winning over African Americans. And black people saw that con game running at them, if I can be honest with you. But so I don't think it's been tried in the city of Nashville. But what I do know is, just from my academic background, my academic training, is that there are enough experts out there that can quantify the amount of dollars lost based upon the amount of business closures, the amount of homes people that were displaced, the people who had to change schools. We can put a dollar amount and quantify that. And what does that mean as an outcome? There are many different approaches to how you repair that, many different policy interventions, how you do that. And I'm just, more of a fan of an argument that to get there, it also is going to require reducing polarization inside of, affected communities, African American communities. And one way to reduce that is what some refer to as participatory development, which is a model that's used often in poor communities, where those communities that are most impacted can actually decide for themselves what reparative justice looks like. But what they tried in Nashville with the freeway and the cap, that was a Chamber of Commerce backed imposition on black folks. Okay. If I can say that, right? Not over. If I can say that.
You said it.
Okay.
It's been said. He said it. Dr. Hanneman, you have anything to add to that?
Well, I was just going to, suggest, it has been done. It is actually done quite often, just not, in African American communities. So we see that, after natural disasters strike, especially in prominent communities, those prominent communities are restored and sort of break, record speed. And so I think that, local government, local communities, state governments, the federal government, I think, as Dr. Franklin had mentioned, if we can sort of just continue to drive, partisanship down, continue to develop communities that are, savvy enough to sort of begin to utilize more so some of these different governmental outfits. I think that it's not rocket science to sort of fix these communities. It's, I think, more so just the partisanship of it all.
And we talk about, I think we get into, we talk about fixing the communities, or building communities, I think we get into the organizing aspect of it too. Especially, it's like, well, what can everyday community members, whether they are affected or not, indirectly or directly affected, what is that step? Is it via policy? Is it talking to your local council man or woman. What do you all feel is probably the best steps for community to be able to really be able to organize and take action when harm is done, especially to this degree, and even if it's 100, 200 years after the fact, there's still derivative effects, as we know. I'll let you start with that, Dr. Hamilton.
So in the context of the Wilmington coup, there, Todd, I think that it's very illustrative. When those black people fled their communities, unfortunately, on the other side of that, a lot of black communities welcomed those people in with open arms. They went to different community centers, they went to different churches, and they welcomed them in with open arms. We also saw a reemergence or a reassertion of the black press during that time. People, African Americans outside of Wilmington really didn't just take it lightly. They really started to sort of spread their tentacles. They began to sort of organize. You had people such as Ida B. Wells, even people such as W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington to a relative degree, began to sort of organize in their own different ways, in their own different channels to have to sort of muster an appropriate response. And I think that's really what it's going to take in contemporary times, is that the communities, we're going to have to start reaching out to our brothers and sisters in other communities, and we're going to have to sort of play the game the way that organizations around the world plays it. I mean, there are many sort of national organizations that are ready to kind of step in and provide assistance and things like that. So I mean, just sort of using the network the way that the people right after the women in Coup d'etat used their network. I think that's something that could be helpful today.
Okay. Dr. Frank, got anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I think just pulling all levers, whether it be harm reduction strategies, community defense strategies, mutual aid societies that can, or what we used to call mutual aid societies, what some people used to later call survival programs. Okay. I think all that matters as part of a cohesive infrastructure that can engage in policy interventions, but also offer a safe space in the form of community solidarity. And also, I think building out, relationships with other groups that are similarly, maybe not the same, but similarly positioned, where those kinds of constructive coalitions matter a great deal. The politics does matter. I mean, okay. Even if you have a holistic kind of community that has a thriving economy, whether it be Tulsa, whether it be Wilmington, if the other side can control the politics, can call out troops, they can control the ballot box, then the other side then has a way of then penetrating and ultimately destroying one's economy. If I can make one more point about the coup, yeah. And this is important for the audience, that the coup has to be seen also in the context of the Supreme Court. Okay. And the Supreme Court from the 1870s on up to 1896 made a series of decisions that devastated the black community. We often talk about the Plessy case, but for me, for the Wilmington coup, one of the worst, if not the worst decision, was a case called U.S. versus Cruikshank in 1873, in which you had a massacre. It was in many respects a worse massacre than Wilmington, and it was a massacre of African Americans who were actually vying for power in in Louisiana, okay. And at the Colfax courthouse, and it came after a similar massacre in New Orleans, and the Supreme Court got hold of that case and had to decide whether or not a Reconstruction law or a series of Reconstruction laws called enforcement acts allowed for Klan-like figures, the Ku Klux Klan and white mobs, to be brought in under federal indictments and convicted. And the lower courts decided in favor of the civil rights groups. Okay. The Supreme Court came out with what might be, in the Cruikshank case, the crazy and worst decision, one of the worst in American history, because the Supreme Court effectively green-lighted African Americans and said more or less that it was okay if white mobs, Klan-like groups can actually target African Americans. And that case in Cruikshank was about African Americans that were vying for power, who were about to gain power in that small town of Louisiana. And after 1876, that opened up the floodgates against African Americans to be attacked, to be liquidated in politics. And the Wilmington coup comes 20 years later, but it's partly because of the Supreme Court green-lighted that, allowed
Made
for
it
African
okay.
allowed for African Americans to be slaughtered, over politics, to be slaughtered over their gains for political power.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when we talk about what can be done, we have to have holistic methods. We have to have, whether it be mutual aid, whether it be economic strategies, political strategies, but the politics does matter.
You talk about power. When we see events like Wilmington or Tulsa or the ones in Louisiana, when black people in power go hand in hand, it seems like, you know, this country has a very, very terrible reaction. Do you all believe that's still the case in many ways? And do you think this plays a part in just the Black American experience psyche? Whether you're trying to build a business, whether you're trying to go into politics, some of these events possibly psychologically going through black folks' mind, and that trauma, how do you combat that? I start with you, Dr. Hannibal.
No, I think you're quite right. Unfortunately, in politics, especially American politics, there's always a quick, short-term gain if you can sort of demonize the other. And in American history, African Americans have been that other. Today, I think we're seeing the LGBT community being that other, immigrants being that other. But you know, when I was looking at this particular case and kind of reading it, most of the sources, they tend to suggest that a lot of it kind of culminated because of the demonization of what black men would do if they were to become in power. An article written by a white woman, white supremacist woman, who was very politically savvy. She was her husband was a politician. She was his campaign manager. So this wasn't some sort of whatever. This was a person who knew exactly what she was doing. Okay. And so when she wrote, her editorial, sort of just demonizing what would happen to white women if black men were allowed to be in charge and things like that, that really kind of set ablaze, and inflamed, people's passions back then. Remember, most people really didn't have much more than a high school education in those days, and so it was really, really easy to sort of drum people up. But you fast forward to today, people have, college education, high school degrees, and they're just as inflamed when things like that come up. It costs people elections when you bring up, the sexual of black men and black women, unfortunately. And so it continues to work like a charm, and that's something that I've been trying to sort of think about as I watched your documentary, is how can we sort of move beyond that? How can we sort of move beyond that collectively and not be so sort of allow ourselves to be picked apart by these sort of old stereotypes and caricatures?
How about you, Dr. Franklin? That blackness and power in this country.
I mean, yeah, it matters. It depends upon the context. If you're Ayanna Pressley, you come out of Boston, it's a multiracial community, you're experiencing some success. There's black lawmakers in Congress who are experiencing some success in which they're coming out of majority white districts, which did not happen 30 years ago. It was almost impossible for that to happen. But on some of those salient elections, for example, 2008 with Obama, and also the most recent election with Kamala Harris, we're definitely seeing that race plays a role in priming voters. And there's an interesting study even about the Obama years, written by a conservative, a very prominent conservative person who used to be involved in high-level Republican Party politics. He said, he kind of quoted a number of studies that stated that on every single issue, there was an increasing black-white divide, and that many whites essentially, let's say, for example, Sandy Hook and gun issues, there was a racial divide, and many whites felt that that they were experiencing reverse discrimination. So there was a heightened level of racial resentment, to use a fancy word that we use in political science, emerging in the Obama years, and we saw that during also in this last election involving Kamala Harris. So we do see that in certain elections, and it's still going to be with us for the future. In the future.
If y'all can close out 15 seconds each of just your last thoughts on this documentary and how it affects race, power, and democracy today, I'll start with you, Dr. Hannibal.
Well, I would say that democracy is something that's very fragile, and it's something that we have to protect We have to hold and guard jealously on many different fronts, from a holistic perspective. We have to be careful in the way we campaign for in politics. We have to be careful the way we use media. We also have to, I think, be very appreciative of the resilience of the African American constituency, given everything that they've gone through, the way that they have been able to sort of move forward and try to sort of rebuild some of the things that were taken from them.
Dr. Franklin, 15 seconds.
It's important to capture your histories. Much of the history of African Americans, or in general, civil rights, racial violence, has not been captured, has not been told. So, and the audience, you can start right now with your kids, in which they can interview their elders and catalog those stories. And once you do that, you'll find that there's a lot more relevant stories that intersect with politics and the so-called American experiment.
Let's give our guests a round of applause. And thank you all for watching another episode of Sights of the Community. And if you would like to watch more, please visit our YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@Nashville PBS. Thank y'all again.
Thank you.
For sure.
Thanks so much.
And thank you all.